Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Penny Byron, Director of Partner Ecosystems at Bridge Partners. Penny, welcome. That's quite amazing. So when I think about these, companies that do brands that you mentioned, Cisco, Extreme, etc., Adobe, they have incredibly diverse, partner network, ecosystem network, alliance partners, and etc. So when you look back over the last decade, what do you think the two or three major things that have changed?
I'd say the complexity is probably the first thing, right? You really used to see one strong partner who controlled the opportunity or controlled the deal. But now the ecosystem plays such a huge role. If you look at the shift in how customers are buying, it's really changed substantially. Not only is it now many more partners, but how they make their buy decisions are totally different. So, and before we might have one partner, now you have anywhere from 4 to 7, right? So 7 over the life cycle of their journey, but in an average opportunity, you have about 4 partners. So it might be a GSI who's looking to help them do a digital transformation. That's the first partner. But then they're partnering with an ISV who has a custom solution. They're partnering with an MSP who's going to provide the managed services on, the renewals and the monthly servicing of whatever that managed service is. And then you've got, a local VAR who might be doing the install and maintenance. So that complexity has really changed the game, I think, in terms of how vendors need to look at their ecosystems and make sure that they have the right partners in their ecosystem to deliver.
So going back to the diversity that has happened or happening, what do you think are the key drivers behind that? Why did that happen?
It's been an evolution, right? VARs went from being just VARs to VARs and MSPs, or VARs and, sometimes an ISV, they have a custom solution they want to drive down. So we really saw the segmentation happening, organically. They needed to focus to become more profitable, right? So that might be on the services side of the house, that might be on the consulting side of the house for the GSI. So they're really focusing on where they're bringing the most value and where that profitability lays in. And then in terms of how they're working with the customer, there's still one partner who owns that relationship, right? So it could be the GSI who's driving it. It could be the MSP who is managing these managed services and happens to notice an opportunity, right? That says, hey, look, we're high risk for cybersecurity attacks, right? And so they start the opportunity by doing a security assessment, and right. So the roles have shifted a bit, but it really has happened, I think, organically because people needed to double down and companies needed to identify where their profit centers were going to be and where they wanted to invest in.
So when you think about the IT ecosystems, it's roughly around $6 trillion in size, right? And a significant portion of those are more than half is owned by the top 60 companies. And traditionally, I've had a lot of these discussions with Jay McBain, is that when you think about it has been driven by, and you're kind of alluding to that, is two drivers. One is on the front end, the nature of services and aggregation that has changed, like VARs moving into MSP or MSSP or system integrators now going into multiple sectors. But also on the back end, it has been driven by this fundamental notion of whether the Wintel ecosystem, but it's been always better, faster, cheaper, right? Do you think I saw a survey that average enterprise has 641 applications and they don't even know that's how many they have, and there's a big push to cut them down. So when you look at how diverse it has become, how complex it has become, for it to continue to grow, does it need significant simplification, or what happens?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And I think simplification is definitely a main driver that we see right now, especially in security, right? So if you look at AI in particular, right, with the advent of so many new threats and attacks, right? Using that to develop advanced threat and detection and response solutions, et cetera, we're really seeing that so many point solutions are hard to integrate. They're hard to manage. They're hard to maintain. So moving to more platform solutions, right, is going to force consolidation. So that's a big shift that we're seeing. Simplification is going to continue to see more of a shift to a platform solution that enables better management on the customer side of the house, but also on the MSPs and the partners who manage those. So I think that what we see is because that those point solutions are more difficult, and all those applications being the example that you just talked about, Sugata, platform solutions are going to continue to be more popular. So you're going to see consolidation of those point solutions. You're also going to see that management component. People want to, if I'm an MSP, right, or somebody who's managing all of those applications, I'm going to want to have a single pane of glass that I can manage those from in order to look at those managed threat detection responses. I need to respond to those right away, right? I also need to know what's happening in order to streamline performance or to manage costs for multi-cloud, et cetera. So having that single pane of glass is going to continue to drive that simplification, drive platform, drive consolidation. But that's really where we see this going, is because, to your point, there are too many applications out there right now to manage effectively and to also get the money back from what you're spending on those applications, because there's a lot of overlap. So simplifying, consolidation, single pane of glass management, and platform management.
I know you spend a lot of time thinking about the
Yeah.
buyer's journey because it has profound implications on the partner ecosystem, who you partner with, how you go to market. So I want to take one analogy, and I'd love to sort of, get your insight into this. So when I think about the car market, in early stages of my career, I was at Honeywell, I was a product line manager selling into the automotive segment. And one of our biggest go-to-market revenue was through aftermarket, because you would buy a car in, I'm going to date myself, 80s or 90s or 2000. A significant portion of the money you would spend in buying a car stereo or other accessories and etc. Right? I think about my EV today. There is nothing I can put in there because it's all integrated. So when you think about the evolution of the IT system, because going back to the car days, I buy a car, whatever it is, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000. I possibly spend hundreds of dollars, if not thousand, retrofitting it with the way I want. Today, I buy an EV. The only thing I can put in, maybe a picture in it or something else, right? Do you see that's what's kind of happening and will accelerate? If that what happens on IT systems, that it becomes large platforms that are owned and served in a subscription economy, then what happens to the buyer journey that used to go through figuring out this product, that product, etc.? What changes there?
So interestingly enough, the vast majority of buyers are now millennials. They're 18 to 40, right? 60 plus, 65 plus percent. So most of how they look to make decisions are done online. So they're still doing a lot of research. They're still going to be influenced heavily by that digital journey, by thought leadership, by those watering holes of influence where they look for key pieces of information. And there's always going to be new innovation. So I think there'll be new, interesting, Silicon Valley is famous for always having the next new solution, the hot new thing that you have to have that you never even knew you needed, right? So all of these great solutions, especially around security in particular, where there are so many various ways to manage threats, I think you're going to continue to see new innovations in technology. Will they come out separately? Probably to start, but they will probably get acquired and become part of a platform solution, right? Or they'll look to have strong API integration so that the ability to deploy as a seamless part of that platform is really their key to success, right? So if they're not already part of that platform, they're going to look to make that an easy way to integrate into those platforms and a seamless way for those partners to manage it. Because I think when they look at a solution, they're going to be promoting it as a complete solution, right? That solves a business outcome. So as opposed to, we used to say, point products, right? You're going to have a business solution that serves for a business outcome. So if my business outcome is, hey, look, I'm worried about, email threats, or I'm worried about, uptime, right? I'm worried about whatever it might be, right? Resiliency, redundancy, what have you. I'm going to be looking for that business outcome, and that business outcome might involve, 7 different point products or a platform solution, right? So I think that you are going to continue to see innovation, but if it's not integrated into a platform already, all of these, vertical solutions and new innovation solutions are going to look to layer onto those platforms and make it easy to integrate with them, because that's the key to success, right? Is having a complete solution versus their one point product that adds better value to the solution, if you will.
So going back,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. So going back to the buyer
Yeah.
behavior, if you think about, a couple of decades ago, SMB mid-market didn't have a lot of penetration, but they predominantly based on budget. They bought
Yeah.
based on budget. When you came to enterprise, they predominantly bought based on analyst
Mm-hmm.
endorsement, right? Whether it's Gartner, whether it's Forrester, whether it's IDC, whoever that is. You made it to the leaders quadrant, you made it through the RFP.
ZINFI.
So, right. So if you look at today with the proliferation of the platform, and Ramaswamy from Snowflake, made a statement in a podcast I heard. He said incumbents have a huge advantage, right? Because of the trend that you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, because buyers have invested into a platform, they're looking through this aggregated economy instead of buying something point, they want to see a solution as a
Yeah.
part of that. So what behavioral changes from an ecosystem perspective do you think that trend is driving today?
I think it's a shift towards more alliance partnerships, right? Because you do need that foundational technology, but you also need the innovations that we talked about, right? So there's always going to be a vertical point solution that's going to better solve for retail or financial services or what have you. And the platform vendors are not really focused on that, right? They're focused on the horizontal solution. They're focused on solving, a core set of business needs, if you will. So all of those additional vendors that layer on, right? They're going to need to have alliance partnerships. They're going to need to look at how do I make my platform solution more robust, right? How do I better have a better together message, if you will? So those alliance partnerships we continue to see developing. As a matter of fact, we just did a report in the Compass report that said, hey, look, 65+% of partners who are partnering with alliances, right, and are aligned to their corporate strategy, they're really seeing the huge shift in growth, right? They're seeing 2x, 3x growth. So 65% of them are saying they're seeing substantially more growth with these alliance partnerships. So I think we'll continue to see them investing in more alliance strategies where it's not just one vendor, one partner going in to sell. It's a partner who's partnered with an alliance partner, an ISV partner, right? So these ecosystem sales it's a whole new co-sell motion, right? And it's really lining it up against that customer journey we talked about, which is, where does the partner fit along that customer journey? Your GSIs might be your influence partners who are under awareness, right? And maybe, part of your consideration. And then you've got your MSPs and who are going to do part of the proof of concept with your GSIs, right? During consideration. And then, so it's really mapping those things and figuring out how do you do partner to partner and how do you make sure that you have those right partnerships and that you're enabling them, whether you're enabling them through your co-sell motions that you have directly or you're enabling them through something like the marketplaces, which are definitely accelerators for growth right now.
I'll come back to co-sell and marketplace because those are two big
Yeah,
topics to talk about. But I do want to go back a little bit and double click on one
sure.
dimension. So if you look at the IPO market today, there's a lot of late stage companies are kind of
Yeah,
holding out. And predominantly when you hear the narrative, one side is of course the demand side is the question if they float. But also on the supply side, on their side, the growth has stalled. Previously, 40, 50, $80 million revenue, if you had profitability and 20, 30% growth, you could go
yeah,
IPO. That bar is at $500 million
yeah,
now, right? And then they still need to show substantial growth like what Snowflake and others have achieved. So today, if I'm a late stage,
yeah.
tech company, or I'm a VC holding a portfolio, is that the reason that we're primarily seeing a lot of M&A roll-ups, or they're holding out in the private market because there are no more single point product play? I'm a part of someone's portfolio play, and without a partner ecosystem, I cannot really accelerate. Therefore, if I have not invested, do you have a sense of why there are so many companies waiting or not going IPO? Is there any macro trend driving that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we've had these conversations, with a number of different folks. And I think, the consensus that we've seen is exactly what you just mentioned. So it's a combination of right now there are economic factors where there's a lot of uncertainty in what's happening with, are we going into, a recession mode? Are we not going to go into a recession mode? So people are being very strategic about the investments that they're making, and they're being very cautionary, right, in their optimism on how fast things are going to grow. So that's the one factor, right? That's one influence. It's just what's happening in the financial sector right now. But in addition to that, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Which is okay, how can you succeed with one point solution? Is that sticky enough? Are you a good acquisition target, perhaps, right? So that plays into it as well, right? If you can get a foot in the door enough where you've got that base, that incumbency that you talked about, that may be enough of a lever to be a good acquisition target, right? So a lot of folks are looking at more of that acquisition into a platform strategy, right? But to do that, they sort of have to build that base first, right? They have to prove the model, prove that they're a viable solution, especially in enterprise, right, or mid market. Less so in SMB, it's easier, right? It's a shorter sales cycle. It's a little easier to do the integration, but then you have the whole profitability model, associated with sales and support to that. So it's a lot of mid market and enterprise focus. And I'd say the last thing that we see in this is really just a caution for what is the roadmap, right? It's not just what is the solution, but what is the roadmap? How are you going to shape the market now, but also in 3 to 5 years? Because whenever you're looking at, going public, they're going to be looking at what's your long-term roadmap and what's your horizon. So a lot of folks are just trying to figure that out because there's so many shifts in the market. You may have your strategy down now, but do you have it really built out for the next, 3 to 5 plus years?
So is the positive fallout from that? I mean, we're seeing, rise of this iPaaS economy, right? When you look at solutions like Zapier, Make, Workato, even UiPath, if you look at how they're kind of rolling out, their API structure embedded with the AI, are we seeing kind of a stratification? Because this whole notion Silicon Valley has professed over the last couple of decades is that you got to have product market fit. You got to have product market fit. And to do that, you start with the minimum viable product. It is the opposite of what a platform needs. A platform needs a broad architecture. It needs to have a go-to-market strategy using multiple types of solutions provider, technology provider, right? You need to have a very broad palette to really go after building a platform. So do you think when founders are starting or thinking through, they have to start with the partner in mind? Because that never really happened. When people start a
Yeah.
company, they singularly focus on the customer, right? If people are starting companies, and what I'm hearing from you, the point products have significant challenges for penetration in enterprise, I have to have a platform play. So do the founders now need to think about or understand how does the partner ecosystem, whether it's alliances or go to market like an MSP or an SI, play into their platform strategy and design that in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a consideration. So as a founder, you're always going to think about the end customer first, right? What business challenge am I solving? But you have to think about how that's going to be delivered, right? And a lot of times, folks are just thinking, hey, I have a great product, I have a great solution, especially if you have an engineering background. I have a great product, great solution. Of course, it's going to sell, right? But it's really understanding that go-to-market strategy and what's happening in the market right now, how people are making buying decisions, how the partners that are actually relied on to deliver these solutions and services are selling. What's the value proposition for them? Are there services associated with it? Are they going to make money, right? So it's really that entire strategy they have to be thinking about, especially today with how partners are buying, and because it's really being sold as a complete solution versus a point solution. It's a lot harder to sell, hey, I just have, I'm just going to solve this piece of your problem. It might be, okay, I'm going to do email checks versus, hey, I've got advanced threat detection and I can tell if something's coming in before it even hits your email, right? So the more robust you can make that, the more attractive it is because you're actually solving the customer's need versus a piece of the customer's need. So yes, that has to be the mindset for founders as they're thinking about taking new solutions to market, is not only what business need are you solving, but what else do you need to solve? Who do you need to partner with? And how is it going to be delivered through the partner ecosystem?
So Penny, when you look at some of the success stories, companies that have scaled recently enormously, whether it's Zscaler or
Yeah.
CrowdStrike or Snowflake, now most recently
Mm-hmm.
Databricks, and they're very, very partner
Very.
driven, right? When you look at those
Mm-hmm.
ecosystems today versus the Cisco ecosystem 10 or 15 years ago, are they the same? Are they different in any form or shape? Like, what are they doing today that was not there before?
I think there's a huge shift in terms of being more strategic in the partners that you select, but also investing more deeply in those partnerships. So what we see is being very intentional about the partners that you select in your ecosystem. Again, sort of mapping it back to that customer journey. Who are the who are the partners that I need to help me identify opportunities, help me, right, present new opportunities, close deals, service support, et cetera. So how do I pick the right partners? We're seeing a large focus on partner ecosystem assessment, right? Do I have the right partners? And then investing and doubling down in those smaller set of more strategic partners and being very intentional about what you do with them, right? How do I develop, a better together messaging story, if you will? We just talked about how important it is to have this stickier solution that solves that end customer needs. So with these partnerships, how are you now a better solution to serve that end customer's needs? How do I then give you the right tools, materials, et cetera, to support you, to enable you? So we're seeing, whether that's, seed units or demo gear, or hands-on workshops, or co-sell motions, or overlay resources that help them go and find and sell opportunities and sort of teach them to fish, if you will. We're finding deeper level of investments, those more strategic partner alignments that we're talking about, and also more enablement of partner to partner to partner. We just talked about how important it is to have, maybe a GSI and an MSP and a VAR all in one engagement, one opportunity. But how do you make sure that you're enabling your partners to partner together, right? How do you reward them at each stage of that journey? So we're seeing a big shift in how they partner, how they enable other partners, and how they develop programs to enable and incent those behaviors.
I know Bridge Partners, and you've talked about
Yeah.
this before, published a report about sort of a, two by two map thinking about partner
Yeah.
ecosystems, right? Who is best for you? And this is sort of seminal work that nobody has done before. And we can share some slides if you're able to
Sure.
later on through this podcast. But can you tell us a little bit about the framework, what led to that thinking? Because as I saw the report, I found, wow, I mean, if I'm trying to think my go to market together, forget about spray and pray. I mean, I have to be so much strategic, and I need to think through the layers that I'm going to be part of. And therefore, not just from a product perspective, I need to design an organization that is able to go into those sub layers of that solution set through the alliance partners, and then co-sell and the market. The whole it's like a PhD in
Yeah.
ecosystem. So can you tell us a little bit, like, what led to that report? What is
Sure.
that report? How do you help customers with that framework?
Sure. So we actually work together with partnership leaders who have a really large network of clients, just like we do, right? And there are about 75 large enterprise, large and medium sized successful enterprise clients that were interviewed. And I'm a big proponent of listening to the market, listening to your clients, listening to your customers and your partners about what's happening and what's working and what's not. And what we realized really, really quickly on is that everybody struggles with the complexity, right? Everybody's trying to figure it out, and it continues to evolve and change. And so understanding at any given point in time what's working, what's not, where is opportunity, which vendors are, offer great opportunity, where they're investing in partners, what that means for vendor opportunity, what it means for partner opportunity. There were so many different aspects. We said, hey, look, we're really interested in working with partnership leaders on this whole strategy for how do you figure these things out, right? Because right now there's a bit and a piece everywhere. So what we really tried to do is look at the entire ecosystem, everything from the opportunity for vendors to the opportunity for partners, and then what's enabling it. How do you build those strategies? How do you grow those relationships? How do you enable those relationships? What are things that we need to be looking at, especially in 2025, right? Because this was launched in January, so it was all about, okay, here's the new year, here's the new strategy. As you look at 2025 moving into 2026, how do you make sure you're set up for success? So that was kind of the impetus. And I think it was interesting because, with so much information, there's always so much more you want to put in, right? that never actually makes it in there. So it's sort of what I would call foundational. It's a great place to look at the ecosystem, the trends, what's happening, but it gives you that level set, that foundation to then think about, okay, what does this mean for me, and start building from it and start going the next deeper layer. So I'd say it's a great foundational piece with some good insights, but it gives you that ability to build from it into a more customized strategy for just you and what's important for your business.
One thing that triggered in my mind when I was going through that report is that If you look at the journey over the last 10 or 15 years on the
Yes.
cloud, most of us, we were in the cloud, but we're in a hosted environment. And then we went into these hyperscaler platforms. We're on Azure. My friends, a lot of their companies are AWS or GCP. And the main shift that happened when I think about my engineering team, previously we used to worry about data center, networking, security, and infrastructure. I had all those competencies in place, right? I don't have those anymore because all I have is an Azure architect. But it has lowered our cost of participation, increased our go to market, right? ROI is significantly better, even though I'm paying a lot more for Azure
Yeah.
hosting services versus the data centers I had. But the capabilities I get is ginormous because Microsoft and Google and et cetera, they have invested billions of dollars in building that capability out. So when I think about, your report, what came to my mind is that maybe there's a role called ecosystem architect you need, because it's no longer you put a data center and network and switches together and you host
Yeah.
your app. You have to really architect this thing, understanding, what are the layers in the ecosystem, what competency you need. You need almost these deep expertise and data sciences, which I'm going to come next, in partnership that never really existed before. So do you see new roles like that opening up in organizations which are not our traditional channel account managers or partner managers? It's a whole different role.
It is, right? I mean, if I look at, the rise of chief partner officer, right? That has been one of the fastest growing roles. And we see a huge interest in that, and a number of folks who are really investing in leveling their knowledge base and skill sets around the partner ecosystem. To exactly your point, Sugata, right? It's very complex. And if you want to be successful in the market, your ecosystem is the top lever, right? It's the top lever to make sure that, you can extend your offering, you have a stronger offering, you can, close deals faster, have a larger opportunity size, less churn because it's a secure solution, et cetera, right? All of these are dependent on your ecosystem. And also, so as sort of an interesting tidbit, we find that partners are doing the same thing, right? All of these vendors are competing for the same partners, the same SPs, the same GSIs, right? So it really is a matter of making sure that you have the right value proposition, because partners are being very selective about who they partner with, right? And so as a vendor, you need to be looking at your ecosystem and saying, hey, do I have the right programs, right, to attract the right partners, right? Can I enable them? Can I support them? Can I grow them, et cetera? And that takes somebody who really understands the partner ecosystem, right? So it's really hard to have somebody who just has one piece of it. And so that knowledge and that skill set is very specific. And so as vendors are trying to enhance their ecosystem and their go-to-market strategies, they are looking to bring in that knowledge and expertise that usually so far has been around, chief partner officer. But you bring up a good point together, which is really, more of an architect associated more on the partech side of the house, right? A bit more technical about how do you connect those capabilities and build that better together story and enable that, whether that's API integration, et cetera, right? But I think the combination of those kind of roles, right, is really where we're seeing the market headed. But more so right now, I think we see on the chief partner officer.
So if you think about a C-suite kind of waking up saying, you know what, this pray and pray thing is not working. I got to
Shocker.
architect this thing, right? And co-sell. I need to understand what co-sell is. I need to understand which marketplace I should get listed. I need to figure out what marketing programs or sales programs I need to redesign and redo. So, can you pick an example, whether it's in cybersecurity or data or distributed caching, or pick any one of these that you have worked with, and walk through a journey? How can an organization kind of work with your company and kind of build that out layer by layer, step by step?
Sure. Let's start with cybersecurity, just because it's a hot space right now. We obviously work with all technologies, but this was a SaaS cybersecurity player, right? I would say they're probably mid-sized, right? But they're trying to grow. They were recently acquired by venture capital, right? And so they're re-looking at their entire model. And so what we did is we went in to help them assess what that model looked like in terms of a go-to-market strategy. Looking at their routes to market. What were the right partner types that they had? Did they have the right partner types to support their customer journey, right? So that's your first piece, right? Is really just doing an assessment of where you are, what your growth looks like, where your growth targets are, and what are the most effective routes to market to help you get there. Once we did that, it was really a matter of saying, okay, now that we understand, hey, look, you don't have an MSP program, you need an MSP program, or you need to incorporate your MSPs into your overall program, and here are the key things that they care about, right? So it's really building those value propositions and then helping them create programs that scale to support multiple partners, because you don't have to have a different program for each partner type anymore. That's sort of the old model, right? You want one that rewards based on behavior and what role they play in that customer journey, and you want to incent them to do the things that you need to do to support your customers. So we help them develop their actual MSP partner program and help them launch that partner program. And then, now we're re-engaging with them because they actually got an award for their program. So that was great news, right? We helped them develop a really strong program. But now we're re-engaging with them to how do you continue to activate those new partners that come on? Because it's great that you have a program. It's great that they've signed up, but if they don't actually do anything after they join, right, that doesn't help you. So we're working with them now to actually activate and grow that and develop more strategic motions with some of their other alliance partners, because it's the same thing. An alliance partner, it's great to have an alliance and say, hey, look, we have a great, we have a great story. We could do great things together. But then unless you have an aligned motion, which often takes, an offsite workshop, an alignment on messaging, and, here's the strategy, and here's what our co-sell is going to look like, and here's how we're going to drive opportunity together, and here are the first, here's the first, 90-day plan, 180-day plan, et cetera, then those things don't actually move forward. So we take them all the way through that, and all the way down to even, we have marketing teams who develop, assets and content if they need support on that. So it's everything from the strategy to building programs to helping them execute to creating content to support them.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of building the
Yeah.
strategy, right? Based on the limited time we have. So traditionally, most partner organization has been very reactive, looking through the sort of the rear view mirror, like what happened in the last quarter, and putting programs together. All of these organizations have been incredibly data rich but insight poor, because there has not been long-term trend analysis. Everybody talks about run rates, but very few know what drives the run rates, right? So when you think about your organization or the changes that you're seeing in the customer side, how is data playing a role in helping pulling the strategy together?
Yeah, so glad you asked. And I'll confess I'm a bit of a data geek. So everything I do is very, very data oriented. Probably goes back to my years ago doing a lot of, Bombora and intent and digital signals and dashboards, et cetera, at Cisco for many years. But essentially, data is key, right? We can talk all we want about what we think is happening and glean, insights based on indicators, but it's really the data that tells us what's happening, right? So if we can look not only historically, but benchmark against, what your peers are doing, what your competitors are doing, look at, multi layers of data. So it's not just, how your program's performing or how they're engaging with it, but, are you seeing them identify more opportunities? Are you seeing them close them faster? Are you seeing them, having a larger deal size? Are you seeing less churn? Right? So it's really layering the right pieces of data that will help you tell the right story. And I think that's so key. People get all excited, like, oh yeah, we have all this great data, but then they don't really know what to do with the data. They don't, what does this tell me, right? So I think it's being able to translate that data into a story that is enabling you to say, hey, here's where we need to invest. Because think about this, partner is often, we call it the redheaded stepchild, or the least loved, who doesn't get, all of the investments. And it's really being able to tell the right story to your C-suite to say, hey, look, we need to grow, X% in mid-market. We don't own the customer in mid-market, right? We don't own those relationships. Our partners do. And here are the partners that own it. Here are the ones that are influencing it. See, here's the data that tells you we're growing in mid-market with, these sets of partners, right? They're doing partner-led growth, right? So you have, they're doing maybe, 80% of our partner-led business growth. And so being able to tell that story, being able to look at the data and tell that story is key, right? And so I would say to anyone who's investing in program development, partner strategy, et cetera, data is your best friend, not only to help inform you, but to help get the C-suite on your side so that you have the investments that you need to actually take action and transform your programs, your incentives, right, your support model so that you're successful with the strategy that you need to implement.
So when you think about what's happening with AI when it comes to
Yeah.
data, right? What are your thoughts kind of if you have to think forward like 12, 18, 24 months out? What are the opportunities there?
Oh gosh, so many. Where to narrow it down? Right now, we see a lot of internal focus, right? So whether that's, we talked a little bit earlier about, advanced threat and detection prevention, right? For development of products, right? And machine learning as well as AI. So we're seeing it in product development, right? The use of AI and of solutions, but also I think if I look at it from a sales and a marketing perspective, right now we're seeing a lot of internally focused. It's not so much on delivering it externally as a service as we are seeing a lot of folks looking internally and running pilots. Right? We talked about the fact that you're trying to figure out your landscape. It's a great way to scrape data. Again, going back to data, right? It's a great way to scrape data to see who's doing what, and do you have the right partners in your landscape, and where did you grow, and how did you grow, and where are your gaps, et cetera. So, there might be, pilots around that, or, a lot around content creation. Can it get me, 50% of the way there? Can it get me 70% of the way there? How do I iterate or do a, vertical solution, et cetera. So we see a lot of internally focused right now. And I think, if we look, a year out, 2 years out, we're going to be looking more at, what is that service delivery for end customers, right? So what are the things we deliver to them? What are we enabling for them? How does it interact with, with end customers? So I think we'll shift more from just internal to more, what does this enable me to deliver for an end product, an end solution to my customer?
So if I kind of, recap some of the things you said. First, you said it's incredibly important not to throw things out there and hope it will
Yes.
sell. Really have a deliberate move, figuring out your strategy, figuring out the partner ecosystems that you want to be part of, putting together the solution layers that you're going to be part of the co-marketing and co-sell motion, and then figuring out an
Yeah.
organization, right? Let's talk a little bit about the
Mhm.
platform. I know been an advocate of the partner tech growth in that area and the necessity of that. So what are your thoughts on how can partner tech allow, a company to kind of scale, accelerate growth, make it profitable? What are the expectations there?
Yeah, I think Partech is probably one of the most important growth levers that vendors have, right? And it's interesting because we work with a number of different vendors and partner types, and it doesn't matter the size. Even some of the larger organizations, you would think, oh, they've got this all figured out. Of course, they can pass leads to partners and manage and measure those leads and tie them to revenue, and right, not the case. So there's a lot of solutions, whether it's measurement of leads and opportunities, the ability to enable multiple partners to co-sell together, right, and manage those opportunities. We talk about being able to manage an ecosystem of partners. That's incredibly complex, and without the right tools and technology to do it, it can become kind of an insurmountable task. Right. And then you've got all the investments you're making, with these partners, whether this is MDF or, strategic investments, big bets, training, support, whatever it might be. So you've got to manage all of that, whether it's, MDF platforms or whatever it might be. So there are all of these components that enable your ecosystem strategy and the ability to support and enable these partners to execute more effectively. And it's a matter of having the right solutions. We also see there's a lot of point solutions, right, that are out there. So it's a matter of getting these right solutions together to complete almost a complete platform solution for the vendors, for Partech to enable these. It's the same thing. They're trying to manage all of these solutions, right? Well, gee, I've got a solution over here for co-sell. I've got another one over here for data analytics. I've got another one here for my basic PRM. I've got it, right? So that we're also seeing, it's incredibly core to their success to have the right tools. And so many clients that we work with have a bit or a piece. They don't have it figured out yet. They don't have the strategy, or there's a lot of what I would call homegrown solutions, right? Which is, oh, well, we can do that. Doesn't mean you should do that, but we can do that. And so they aren't necessarily best in class, or they're not easy to scale because anytime there's a shift or a change, They have to program differently. They have to think about how do they integrate to these other PRM tools and platform and enablement tools, for ParTech. And so that's a huge lever. It's incredibly important as they scale for growth. I see a big recognition now from our clients that they need to invest more in this particular area, in particular, right? Because they feel like they're a little bit behind, I think, and they also feel like there's so many tools. How do we figure out the right one? And then how do we manage it? How do we make sure that we're getting the most of it? Because it's not just choosing the solution, it's then how do we implement it? How do we do the change management so that we use the tools so that we're really effective in managing our ecosystem?
Well, that's amazing, Penny. I know our almost, just went by, but I do want to take 1 minute and have you kind of reflect upon, if you think about the next 12 to
Yeah.
18 months, one or two or three trends that you think we expect to see in the overall in tech ecosystem.
Well, I think in the ecosystem, we'll continue to see more alignment around identifying the landscape, right? The partner landscape and aligning those partners to the customer journey. That's just a huge focus. I see it with all of our clients right now, just trying to understand and make sure that you have the right partners in your ecosystem. The next thing I'd say is it's really around making sure that you're making the right investments in enablement. And that's a combination of program design, right, around enablement and around co-sell motions and also routes to market, because it's also a lot about how are you delivering and how are you enabling those multi-partner solutions to be delivered right in your ecosystem, whether those are marketplaces or just other motions that you have internally. And then lastly, I think probably AI, right? What's happening around AI, the investments that are being made, we'll continue to see a lot of investments in the pilots. People are really trying to figure out how they are more productive, how they can enhance what they're doing, how they can gain a competitive advantage, right? How they can gain more insights into their ecosystem, et cetera. So there's a big trend towards working with AI to figure out what those pilots might be, and that's only going to get more so. I see that's going to grow over the next year to 2 years to past that.
That's simply amazing. Well, Penny, I wanted to sincerely thank you for being here. We're going to have an event in September timeframe in Palo Alto. Would love to have you as a part of the panel.
Definitely.
There's so much to cover. I wish we had another extra
Same
hour,
here.
but thank you again for being here
Thanks
this
for
morning.
having me. This is
Thank you.